Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Department of Sociology, Assistant Professor, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on sociology in India. Today in this module, we are going to discuss on the debate on urban settings. This module has been written by Sancharini Mitra, Research Scholar, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. In this module, we will start with a discussion of the Chicago School and then go on to understand urban as a cultural form. We will also understand the various dimensions of the concept of new urban sociology, especially also focusing on political economy, understanding governance within the urban spheres. We will also briefly glance upon the urbanization in India and especially the processes of social exclusion within city spaces and especially focusing on urban poverty. Objective. This module seeks to analyze the earlier as well as the current debates on urban settings with specific reference to urbanization, social exclusion and urban poverty in India. This module tries to highlight the different perspectives through which the urban settings have been looked at. It focuses on key arguments starting from the pioneering debates of the Chicago School, the works of Park and Burgess to the emergence of new urban sociology and criticisms posed by Manuel Castells and David Harvey. This module also tries to understand how there happened a shift in understanding the urban setting from looking at the urban as a cultural form to a more holistic approach. It then focuses on the Indian scenario pertaining to urban studies and the different ongoing debates. It examines complex processes like urbanization, its major trends and issues, social exclusion in urban locales in terms of class, caste and gender, urban poverty which has to be understood in a different light than rural poverty, and also urban as influenced by the neoliberal discourse of governance. Chicago School. The sociologists who were earlier engrossed in the study of the urban barely had a concrete theoretical object of the urban. Whatever they studied were merely processes they termed as urbanization, a homogeneity of human behavior, and attitudes they term as urbanism, but their understanding did not culminate into an holistic theorization on the urban. The notable works from scholars of the Chicago School included Human Ecology by Park and Concentric Zone Model by Burgess. There are certain limitations of the Chicago School as pointed out by Sharon Zukin. Urban sociologists of this school looked only at patterns of migration and human settlements in an urban context and took them as given. Further, they used only ecological and cultural sense to analyze the urban system, and they used the two terms urbanization and modernization almost in a parallel manner. They also ignored the role of the state, which was crucial in the formation of the cities. Human ecology. Robert Park. Robert Park was very much influenced by the evolutionary nationalism propounded by John Dewey. According to him, society is an arena of intense competition on one hand as well as solidarity and consensus on the other. Thus, natural order is established in a society. He applied several principles like competitive cooperation, for example, used by naturalists, botanists or zoologists in order to study the social order, how interdependence and interaction among inhabitants create a kind of closed system, and how competitive cooperation happens within its limits. Again, every such community happens to be interrelated with others. This he calls the web of life. He talks about the balance of nature in a society which is maintained through competition, dominance and succession. Competition regulates correlations among individuals. For example, struggle for a strategic location for commercial enterprises decides the margin of urban community, the land value, etc. He coins the term biological economics, which is directly connected to the population pressure. He argues that population might transform the community in certain ways and thus upset equilibrium, bringing about more intense competition and division of labor. Finally, he talks about symbiosis in society, where he argues that the relation between human beings with their immediate environment is arbitrary. This dependent relation is always mediated by other human beings, and their social structure grows on the basis of normative customs and gets institutionalized. He argues that human society is arranged at two levels: biotic, the symbiotic society based on competition, and cultural, which is based on interaction and moral consensus. However, human relations are far more complex than this basic classification. Different social orders seem to be arranged in a hierarchical manner with ecology at the base and moral order at the top. Society thus functions like a control organization which integrates individual beings, brings about cooperation among them and extends greater control in higher level of the social order. Concentric zone theory, the Ernest Burgess. Ernest Burgess of Chicago School formulated his concentric zone theory based on the city of Chicago as a model. The description of a model according to Burgess numbers can be applied to any large city. Concentric zone refers to circular belts or zones having a common center. According to him, urban population moves away from the core and expands towards the periphery, the suburbs. There are 5 concentric zones that are classified. The Central Business District, CBD. The CBD demonstrates a concentration of economic institutions, commercial, civic or transportation activities. Key banks, shopping areas, offices, laws, departmental stores, theatres, restaurants are all located in this zone. Zone of transition. This zone is also termed as a light manufacturing zone. There is a constant encroachment in this area by the center. This belt also demonstrates a cluster of slums, decaying houses. Rate of poverty and crime are usually high. Zone of the working man's home. He points out as a low-class residential area, immigrants tend to gather here because of easy access to the CBD and the light manufacturing zone. Residential zone, also known as the medium-class residential zone, this area houses single-family homes usually consisting of middle or affluent higher-class residents. People living in this zone belong to technical, business or clerical professions. Commuter zone. This is the affluent suburbs inhabited with people of the uppermost socio-economic tier of society. Big bungalows, mansions, etc. are located in the zone. However, this model was criticized because of its ideal typical nature, but in reality, cities may not conform to this model always. Moreover, Burgess had made a clear classification of the zones, but actually cities cannot demonstrate such clear demarcation. There is bound to be gradual transition from one zone to the next. Finally, the entire theory was formulated only one city, Chicago. This model, critic argues, cannot be applied universally to understand other major cities of the world. Urban as a cultural form. The urban sociologists of earlier traditions, both the American and European, tried to analyze the urban settings from a cultural lens. They also tried to give explanations to the urban experience in terms of human interaction, interrelation, process of acculturation, democratic factors. The notable sociologists who used the cultural lens to study urban are George Simmel, Louis Wirth, and Robert Redfield. Simmel's Metropolis and Mental Life. Simmel tried to establish that the growth of a modern city influences individual attitudes and behavior in terms of adjusting to city life, which ultimately affects interpersonal relationships. Urban setting imposes on its citizens a kind of protective organ which acts as a buffer zone for individuals in an ever-changing urban environment. An individual in a city becomes pragmatic, less emotional, reluctant and indifferent as there occurs a growing emphasis on the intellect. This growing apathy of the urban population is termed as blaze attitude. This lies in a stark contrast with smaller towns which are characterized with more familiarity among individuals and personal relationships. This urban experience results from a freedom that the city dwellers go through. Though it is liberating on one hand, on the other, the resulting blaze attitude isolates the city dwellers from each other as well as from the fellow country people. Thus, human relations get fundamentally altered. Thus, interpersonal human relations and attitudes are greatly influenced by the urban environment. Also, there is stark distinction between behavior of individuals in a metropolis and in a small town. However, this work has been challenged for being too simplistic. One shows a strict demarcation between rural and urban life in terms of human interactions and interrelations, but further, this work is limited only to the understanding of urban experience from a cultural perspective, ignoring other possible factors like social structures, especially the role of the state. Louis Wirth, Urbanism as a Way of Life. Wirth's sociological understanding of the city gave a new direction to urban studies. His analysis revolves around 3 major issues: size of the population, density, and its heterogeneity. Combining these 3 elements, he theorizes on urbanism as an experience as different from the process of urbanization. First of all, Wirth tries to provide a sociological definition of a city. He argues that it is difficult to define an urban agglomeration only based on its size. There are a number of census definitions available, but those have a limited purview of a city being simply an administrative unit. Improved transportation leads to the expansion of city life into peripheries. Therefore, urbanization is not simply attraction of population towards cities, but also how that happens a kind of emphasis on the characteristic traits of the city lifestyle. Now, he tries to draw a theory of urbanism based on the linkages between population size, density, and heterogeneity. To him, the larger the population of a city, the more population density and heterogeneity is expected. Thus, there is bound to happen a greater accentuation of traits characterized within a city. Since the city attracts a large population of migrants, it becomes a melting pot for people of different races, ethnicities, etc. Interaction in a city space is utilitarian based on secondary relations. Because there is much variation in the population, there occurs spatial segregation in terms of race, class, ethnicity, etc. within the limits of a city. When the size of an area is constant but the size and density of population increases, it leads to growing differentiation and specialization. Density also segregates places of residence from working places. Thus, spatial segregation results in increased volatility of relations. Various interests emerge out of different parts of social life. The individual dwelling in a city needs to acquire multiple memberships in different groups based on their respective interests and thus meeting their ends. However, Wirth has been criticized for making too generalized statements on the traits of urban life. Castells argues that the characteristic trait that were chose to be those of urban life, for example, stress on individualism, anomie, secondary relations, and thus can be seen in spaces other than urban locale. Robert Redfield, Rural-Urban Continuum. Robert Redfield, in his most notable work, The Folk Culture of Yucatan, where he constructed the rural-urban continuum, an imaginary hypothetical continuum linking the rural-urban societies at polar ends. He studied the process of acculturation from the rural to the urban forms of societies. He dealt with 4 societies for this study: the tribal society, a peasant-based village, a town, and Merida, the capital city. He saw that all these 4 societies can be placed respectively across a continuum in terms of growing secularization, cultural disorganization, and greater stress on individualization. His construct was very much ideal typical. On one hand, he understood folk societies as isolated communities showing signs of cultural homogeneity, small population, easy technology, minimum division of labor, greater solidarity and harmony. On the other hand, he characterized urban societies as showing states which were completely dissimilar to rural societies, with signs of disorganization, secularization and individualization. The rural-urban continuum has been criticized since then. First of all, the characteristic traits of rural or urban societies that Redfield has pointed out are too ideal typical and might not represent real situations. Also, Redfield has stressed on the importance of historical research to study socio-cultural change, but without focusing on historical particulars. That has also been relegated to critical scrutiny. New urban sociology debates with the earlier Chicago school. The new urban sociology by Manuel Castells and David Harvey came as a critique to the ongoing debates of Chicago school. It differed from the Chicago school in the ways of giving a more holistic account of urban processes and structures. It emphasized more on giving economic accounts rather than simply giving ecological and cultural analysis of the urban system. The issues raised by scholars are given below. Manuel Castells has raised a fundamental question: is there an urban sociology? Answered negatively. He posed a major criticism to the dominant paradigm of the Chicago school because of its limitations and raised a concern for the need of a new urban sociology. He had put forth the argument that urban sociology of contemporary times had no real or concrete subject. He put forth the argument that urban sociology of the contemporary times had no real or concrete object to study. To him, urban sociology was based simply on studying traits which are not rural. He criticized the concentric zone model of being too universalistic in its orientation, as the model is based only on one city of Chicago and can hardly be applied to understand major cities in the rest of the world. However, this study resulted in giving an ecological account of the social, cultural and economic processes. He also criticized Louis Worth's theory of urbanism as a way of life and argued that disintegration, individualism, anomie, which Worth has shown as characteristics of city life, can actually happen in any society at any given point of time. Thus, these features cannot be reduced to being markers of urbanization either. The urban sociologists limited the scope of study within a culturalist, for example, the work of Worth, or an ecological framework, the work of Burgess, argues Patel. So, in order to formulate a scientific theorization on the urban question, one needs to focus on collective consumption as a unit of study in the locale of advanced capitalist society. Walton argues that collective consumption refers to housing, telecommunication, transport systems that form a crucial aspect of urban system. Mass mobilization or urban social movements gather momentum around issues related to collective consumption. Therefore, this also refashions space in a capitalist society. Space is not simply a social unit but has a material aspect to it where all kinds of human actions takes place. It is a space in the urban locale where all sorts of technical and social activities are concentrated. Moreover, he highlights the crucial role of the state in organizing different spheres of advanced capitalist societies. The state acts as an arbitrator between dialectical interests of the capitalist and the masses. The city also becomes a space for capitalist development. Thus, it also highlights the role of the state. When a state fails to manage equal distribution of resources for collective consumption, discontentment happens at the mass level. This gives rise to urban social movements. The space is an important locale of study rooted in contesting social relations, and society is innately linked with spatial locations. Therefore, to understand the advanced capitalist society, one needs to theorize on the urban. In spite of his dissatisfaction with urban sociology in the past, Castells is now more hopeful about the new urban sociology that has paved the way for urban studies of the contemporary times. He hopes that urban studies will have more interdisciplinary and will try to bridge the epistemological gaps that the old school posed. David Harvey. David Harvey was a contemporary of Castells. To him, the process of urbanization is directly related to capital accumulation, and in this he was heavily influenced by the Marxist analysis of capital accumulation and used his interpretation to form a complete completely new perspective on urbanization. In Harvey's analysis, the primary focus was on how land becomes an important commodity. Land is spatially fixed, it is essential for sustenance of human beings, and it is also fairly permanent. So in order to understand the implications of urbanization, one needs to take into account how land affects the accumulation and circulation of capital. Harvey puts forth his argument at two levels: capitalist accumulation and class struggle. First, he talks about circulation of capital via three consecutive circuits. The primary circuit, or the first circuit of capital accumulation, happens in the manufacturing sector. Capital is invested here for the production of the goods. Production and consumption of goods happen within a span of a single time period, but this ultimately leads to the creation of large quantity of surplus. Overproduction can also lead to a decrease in the levels of profit. So from here, capital moves to the secondary circuit. Here one needs to understand two important concepts: fixed capital and consumption fund. At the level of production, the capital is invested as fixed capital, which acts as aids in the whole mechanisms of production and is used throughout a long span of time. The fixed capital is not directly used as raw material inputs. At the consumption level, again, one creates a consumption fund from goods that acts as support mechanism, rather than directly contributing to the consumption process. Some goods can be directly consumed, for example, washing machines, television sets, while other can be used as a material structure for consumption, such as houses, offices, roads, subway, etc. The latter he termed as built environment for consumption. Both the roles of the capital market and the state are important in this context. However, there happens a kind of investment in the secondary circuit, due to which capital falls into the tertiary circuit of capital. The tertiary circuit comprises of investment in science and technological fields so that scientific advancement can be utilized to enhance the production processes. Moreover, investment in this sector will also ensure qualitative reproduction of manual labor in terms of enhancing the education and health of the labor engaged in the production process so that the working capacities increase. Thus, investment in the tertiary circuit finally benefits the capitalists themselves. The second theme of his work is class struggle, the conflict between capital and labor. There are two aspects of class struggle according to Harvey: quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative aspect deals with mass of labor engaged as a production force. The more surplus labor there is, the greater will be the size of the reserve army of labor. Therefore, it will be easier for capitalists to resist and regulate class conflict in place of work. On the other hand, qualitative aspect takes into account skills, attitudes, training of the worker. There are divisions among the labor force along racial, ethnic or religious lines. Therefore, to understand class struggle in the workplace, one needs to know how class consciousness might arise despite all kind of internal divisions, often enforced by the capitalists themselves so that the workers cannot unite. Limitations. The new urban sociology based on his critique of Chicago School on Marxist analysis. However, one of its major limitations was that it reduced to being an economist in nature. It focused on the economic process with regard to urban structures and in this process overlooked class as a conception. Political economic approach. Understanding the new urban sociology will be incomplete without mentioning the political economy approach. This has been one of the most important theoretical approaches in urban studies. First of all, political economy tries to give a historical explanation of urban development from a pre-capitalist to a capitalist mode of production. It explains urbanization and urbanism as a contingent historical process. It analyzes the process of industrialization, centralization of the market system, development of the state not only in Western capitalist society but also into countries like China, former Soviet Union or developing countries with mixed economies. It tries to focus on class structure within cities, how the poorer sections both from urban and rural locales contribute the labor at cheaper rates and thus subsidizing the production economy at large. The approach also critically analyzes the role of state in paving ways for urbanization. Comparative studies have become important here because the process of urbanization are different from the developed to the developing countries. Now there is greater focus on understanding global cities or the international financial and informational hubs that are linked with each other across the globe. More than that, they are linked with the national hinterland. The study of informal economy is given importance. Helen Safa has shown how economics in the developing countries tend to be segregated into formal and informal sectors. The dual sector approach and how economists have criticized it. The informal sectors have a major role to play providing employment to the mass of the population who cannot be absorbed by the formal economic sector. Spatial relations. Spatial relations are also taken into account how space and society are intervened. It is understood that each and every social action is situated in a spatial location, due to which urban space becomes an important category of analysis. The success of this approach lies in its capability of giving structural explanations to urban settings. Understanding governance. The role of the state under a neoliberal paradigm is important to understand, especially in the framework of the new urban sociology. One needs to know how the terms of government and governance are used in this concept and why. Governance becomes a central concept since the surge of neoliberal discourse in the 1990s with rapid globalization. The sociocentric understanding of the term signifies continual reduction of the state's power to intervene in the functioning of the market economy, leading to a withering away of the state. On the contrary, Taylor argues that as a result of growing social complexity, the power of a state's core executive increases. State's activities are all directed towards encouraging and facilitating a business-friendly atmosphere. Governance, therefore, is an ideological construct which tends to justify the functioning of a neoliberal state. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the already established governments in the different states, especially those which were authoritarian and bureaucratic, were considered to be the barriers to growth. The result was revolutionizing governance. The international financial institutions such as World Bank, IMF, etc. decide how good governance should be carried out, thereby legitimizing the neoliberal discourse. It comes as a response to state failure, good state failure. Good governance refers to the means of facilitating development, greater privatization, and direct interventions by governments. A state showing traits of good governance should be able to fight corruption, privatize public endeavors, remove economic regulations, improve democratic processes. However, these does not mean that the state power is on the brim of being withered. Increasing societal complexities actually benefit states' core executive bodies to bring the situation in their own favor. Since good governance requires a strong center for managing strategic activities, the core of the state actually gets more and more strengthened. It is the state which decides how to perform good governance and how much to regulate or not. Urbanization in India, perspectives and trends. In order to comprehend the debates regarding urban settings in India, one needs to look into the urbanization process and its related issues. Urbanization refers to the process characterized by more and more people living in urban areas. Before the British rule, India had experienced pre-capitalist urbanization, including the growth of administrative centers, market towns. During the colonial rule, the growth of contemporary cities like Kolkata, Mumbai, Chennai, and later on Delhi happened primarily because of the direct needs of the colonizers. The profits made from the burgeoning industries were exported to the core countries. Thus, India has always been an integral part of the process of urbanization. In 2010, India had accounted for 11% of the world's urban population. The UN reports estimate that this will reach almost 15% by 2030. Urbanization in India has been slow but steady, argue Mohan and Dasgupta. India's rate of urban population growth has been stable since 1921. From 11.2%, it increased to 27.8% in 2001. However, the total number of urban settlements expanded to only 140%. Balanced urban growth pattern has resulted in increasing percentage of people living in class 1 towns where population is more than 100,000. According to Rakesh Mohan, the process of urbanization is often linked with industrialization as if they are synonymous. However, he argues that the two processes complement each other. Urbanization is a natural consequence of economic change along with the country's development. The rate of urbanization in India increased from 27.87% as far as 2001 census is concerned to 31.16% in 2011. According to census report 2011, population distributions in the rural and urban areas are 68.84% and 31.16%. Therefore, the proportion of rural population has declined from 72.19% to 68.84%. The reports also show that the most highly urbanized states in India are Goa, Mizoram, Tamil Nadu, Kerala and Maharashtra, whereas low rates of urbanization can be seen in the following states: Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, Assam, Odisha, Meghalaya, Uttar Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Rajasthan. Social exclusion in urban spaces. There can be different forms of exclusion of certain sections of the urban population. It can happen in terms of class, caste, religion, ethnicity and gender and other forms. Following are some of the few elements on which exclusion happens in the urban locales. Certain spaces in major cities are increasingly becoming privatized, being accessible to only certain classes. Public spaces in a city often act as an arena of continuous contestation on the basis of culture. This culture is the basis of a city's economic growth. According to Zukin, this culture is the parks, building complexes, etc., and tend to face a kind of cultural wall between ethnic or racial minorities with the vernacular culture on one hand and the middle class population on the other. There is a growing urban fear of outsiders which facilitates greater privatization of public spaces. Here one can cite the example of Zukin's study of Bryant Park in New York, the maintenance of which was taken up by a non-profit organization. By decorating the park, the organization had ensured that the park becomes an object of visual consumption and is accessible only to a certain population who can afford to pay for leisure. Therefore, there is a greater stress on security guards, security gates, surveillance cameras to ensure increased safety of the upper caste, middle class population from the undesirables like tramp, drug peddlers, vagabonds, etc. Thus, there happens a loss of public life for this undesirable population as they are too intimidated to enter these public spaces. One can also cite the example of mushrooming of housing societies in metro cities across India. The advertisement of these housing estates claim to give consumer the perfect solitude that every middle class person seeks in the chaotic atmosphere of the cities. These estates are meant to attract the upper middle class population of the cities who can afford to pay for a comfortable, blissful lifestyle inside the premises of these housing complexes. The premises of these buildings are walled, preventing the outside world even to have a look inside. Here one can also see a stress on security of the inhabitants and surveillance. These are termed as a gated communities where the people who cannot afford to pay for a lavish living are shut out from. Caste. It is assumed that the growing importance of caste in the cities is waning away because of growing cosmopolitanism. However, that it is a myth. Caste politics has always played a pivotal role in the Indian scenario irrespective of the rural or urban context. Early studies on the urban settings maintain that urbanization impacts upon human life by gradually eroding communitarian relations, notably the works of work. However, more contemporary scholars have concluded that community relations do not exist in a variety of social contexts, both rural and urban. There happens to exist urban central community in the Indian context informed by religion and caste. There are different dimensions to understanding the caste system in the Indian cities. Studies have showed that upper caste Hindus are better off than scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and other backward castes in terms of education, employment opportunities and earned income. In the urban context, the OBCs, the SCs and the STs are all generalized into parallel caste profiles as separate from upper caste Hindus. Mohanty argues this is because they already have access to quality higher education. The upper caste Hindus can also secure the best of the jobs, thus marginalizing the SCs, the STs and the other backward castes in a dynamic labor market. With regard to the COSLA system, the central government had proposed reservation for the SCs and the STs in the corporate sectors. Though the reaction had been quite negative as they seemed to emphasize on the merit and qualification of the candidates and not some ascribed criterion, the corporate sectors in reality take into account the potential candidate's familial background. As Jyotka argues, the chances are that an upper caste Hindu candidate will be favored more while calling for a job interview than a Dalit or a Muslim candidate. This unequal access to higher education and employment also leads to an unequal distribution of wealth and better standards of living. Thus, caste inequality is perpetuated and the reservation system cannot be made a long-term solution to this, argues Deshpande. Gender. Public spaces in cities are very much gendered. Access to a city's public spaces is often restricted or even denied to women. To understand such gendered scenario, one needs to look into two things. Firstly, how certain discourses like protectionism, safety and risk, etc. emerge, justifying the exclusion of women from gaining access to certain spaces within the city. And secondly, how caste, class, religious nexus functions threefold in deciding allotment of women's access to space. To elaborate on it a little more, a woman's access to public space is determined by the location of the woman in terms of a class, caste, religion, ethnicity, and also how much risk the woman is ready to negotiate with in order to lay claim on a city's public space. This factor acts hand in hand with fears concerning a woman's honor. For example, a middle class woman is socialized in such a manner that she is always concerned about her fears for her reputation. A lower or a middle class woman is made to abide by the constructed imageries of how a good woman should behave in the public space. If she retaliates against harassment, it is considered that she is encouraging it because it is assumed that a good woman never hits back even verbally at the abuser. On the other hand, in locations of the city where there is a common acceptance of women accessing public spaces even late at night, for example office and market areas, there is also a general societal acknowledgement of the respectability of women belonging to upper middle class. Religious markers on women's body, argues Phadke, also impact on the way in which women negotiate with risk in public spaces. For example, Muslim women wearing burqas might experience the advantage of increased mobility and access to public space, but the religious markers do not prevent sexual harassment. Thus, religious markers on the body, on the other hand, might situate women at bigger threat of violence. Thus, as Phadke argues, women have to constantly negotiate with risk in order to strategically produce safety for themselves in public. Urban poverty in the context of Indian cities. In India, poverty has always enjoyed major attention by development planners and policy makers, but it has always been viewed in the context of rural settings. Even if urban poverty was recognized, policies to alleviate poverty remained the same. Only the term rural was substituted by urban. One needs to understand that with growing urbanization, massive scale migration happened from rural to urban areas. Poverty acquires an urban nature. Urban poverty thus needs to be analyzed separately. It is only recently that planners have shed some light on the urban nature of poverty. It is now recognized, as Jha argues, that urban poverty has multiple dimensions to it. Urban poor has to live through a large number of deprivations. Their daily challenges comprises of various issues like restricted access to housing facilities, lack of employment, limited access to health, education, sanitation or other basic services. Urban poverty consists of various components such as expansion of slums, that is bastis, rapid informalization and casualization of labor, growth of informal sectors in urban areas, lack of basic amenities like education, health, employment. In this module, the writer has highlighted two of the schemes introduced by the Government of India, that is Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission and SGSRY, which is Swarna Jayanti Shahari Rozgar Yojana, to get an idea of how policies are oriented towards poverty alleviation in Indian cities. The Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. This scheme was introduced in 2005 and was supposed to last till 7 years from its inception. It was oriented towards achieving a sustainable development of certain cities, stressing on urban renewal to improve standards of living of the urban poor. It was decided that in terms of implementing the scheme, the government will provide basic shelters like enhanced water supply, better sanitation, shelter, health, education, improved banking, security of tenure, adequate street lights to the urban poor. The scheme focused to integrate poverty reduction objectives with economic growth, and its major objectives were to ensure that the aforementioned basic services are provided to urban poor, to ensure that the basic services are not implemented but are continued in the long run, and to ensure adequate flows of funds to fill up shortages in providing basic services. Swarna Jayanti Shahari Rozgar Yojana. The scheme came up with a 9th plan period. It tried to be more inclusive of the urban poor, aiming at empowerment of socially disprivileged sections of society, especially women. The scheme had a more participatory orientation by building partnership with the urban poor. Therefore, it was concerned more with providing employment to the unemployed or the underemployed or facilitating self-employment by training them under proper skills. It had two components: Urban Self-Employment Program (USCP). This program aimed at training urban women from marginalized sections with required skills or providing them with loans so that they can set up their own microfinance enterprises. Urban Wage Employment Program. This program, on the other hand, tried to offer wage employment to immigrating unskilled full labor population living below poverty line in urban locales. The scheme tries to appropriate this labor by creating a socially and economically valuable community assets. Conclusion. The above mentioned sub-themes try to capture in a nutshell the ongoing debates regarding urban settings extending beyond the arguments posed by Chicago School. The new urban sociology negates many of the arguments of the Chicago School by bringing in new perspectives in the analysis of urban settings. By looking at urbanization process in the Indian scenario, one can see that the number of people coming from rural areas and settling down in the cities are ever increasing. Moreover, social exclusion and urban poverty are integral parts of the Indian cities. Certain groups tend to become marginalized in the urban spaces in terms of caste, class, gender and other factors. Also, Government of India defines urban poverty in a certain manner and also tries to deal with it by means of different poverty alleviating schemes which tries to cure poverty on a short-term plan period basis. In this module on debate on urban settings, we started with discussing the Chicago School and then tried to critique the Chicago School based on the works of the scholars and especially try to understand the developments within the new urban sociology. Further, by understanding urbanization in India based on the works of the Indian scholars, we also try to understand what is the rate of urbanization in India and the complexities attached with it. We also analyzed about how the state introduces different concepts or different plans and policy programs to address inequalities which are a part of the Indian urban settings. Especially by focusing on two poverty alleviation, especially in terms of wage work programs and enterprise based programs, the modules also try to understand the manner in which state intervenes in order to create planned cities in India. Thank you.